Did I do it?
Yep.
Okay, yeah.
It doesn't talk to us anymore.
No.
Go ahead.
Oh, you know the person. Okay.
No, you read them.
Okay. For your back is not getting better. Alton and Kathy, Phil and Cherie, Kelly. You want to give a Kelly update?
Yeah, Kelly is still, I got an email from her. She says, you know, please continue to pray for her. She had another procedure. It didn't give her instant relief from the pain that she's having, but you know, we're still waiting to see whether it does. But she's also in a bad way, and lives in kind of a remote area in Canada. So.
And then Lori Fisher is going through radiation. She's the silversmith locally who has breast cancer that has metastasized and into her hip, and they did radiation on her hip 3 times this week, so at MD Anderson. So please keep her in your prayers.
God, we go through long periods of time where we have our health, we feel good, we're able-bodied, and we forget to come back and say thank you. We forget to acknowledge your presence in this. It's at times where we have these health issues, where the people we care about have these health issues. We find our way to you then, and that's one of our big shortcomings as humans. It's our heart that needs the work, that we see other people's pain, we see other people's suffering, and it not be abstract to us, not be distant from us. You put us here, we know, for a purpose. You called us for a purpose. Help us remember that. As we do these studies in your word, we have questions. Sometimes we have doubts. Speak to our hearts as we go through. Help us to stay with it until we get answers. Amen.
Okay, today is the plan is it's the last week of Esther. I apologize for my voice. I think it's the Sahara dust that's gotten me. But it's the last week of Esther, and it's the last of our studies of women in the Old Testament. Where we left off, Haman is dead. Mordecai has been given Xerxes' signet ring, and Esther received Haman's estate. But still, all the Jews are to be annihilated, killed on the 13th of Adar. And I misspoke saying that Adar was December. You want to explain that?
They have a lunar calendar, okay? It's not our calendar. And so these festivals, these remembrances that they have, Sabbaths, are at different times every year. When we were there, it just happened that we hit all of them, I think, in October. All the big ones in the month of October. And so it might be in November, it might be in September. It's a lunar calendar. And so what we're trying to say is, and I guess I should go back. Remember, Esther is part of the observance of a holiday called Purim, right? Or Purim if you're from the United States. And Purim has to do with these lots, these dice that they threw. They named it that for a reason. It's not called the festival of Esther. It's not called the festival of
Mordecai.
Mordecai or rescue of the Jews. It's called Purim. And Purim was these lots that they threw. They were looking for an auspicious time to kill all the Jews. Haman was. And it was in the first month that he goes looking with rolling the dice. And the dice said the 12th month. And we keep seeing this book, and I keep, I read, but I talk to people, and it looks like coincidence. What a great coincidence The guy looks for what date do I set to kill all the Jews? And the dice roll up and it says, well, in December. It's 11 months away. If it hadn't come up that way, there might not have been time. I mean, what if it had been March? What if it had been the 1st of March or Valentine's Day? It's February 14th. There wouldn't have been time for them to make preparations. There wouldn't have been time for all this to happen. And so the chance they name it this because the rolling of the lots, even in that, you see God's hand at work. That's what this is supposed to be telling us. And so if you see what looks like a lot of coincidence, well, it would be a lot of coincidence. And it is not as overtly stated as some other miracles. But if you really read, a lot of them are not, leading up to the battle. God may tell somebody to do something, but in the battle itself, it may just say the other side just lost heart and ran away. If it bothers you, we'll talk more about it. But there are a lot of people that want to say that Esther is just coincidence. And it really doesn't. And I talked with Gene about this. It really doesn't belong here. We saved some stuff for this last one. That's what I want you to be looking for today.
So the point is there was 12 months notice between the time Haman did the lots and they were going to kill the Jews. And that's important because when we start today, you realize that only 3 months has gone by. So there's still a 9 month before this is supposed to happen. So we're on chapter 8, verse 9. Yes.
The festival of
Purim.
the rolling of the dice. Then the old soldiers at the crucifixion roll the dice.
The Romans, yes.
Is that the same?
It's no. It's similar in that people tend to be superstitious. So these, remember, these are this is the empire of the Medes and Persians, right? And they roll the dice. There's a sort of an understanding that there are gods out there, and maybe they'll guide us. So I go and I do this superstition to look for the best day to do my battle or to do this. Was it the same things that the Romans were doing? Actually, when the Romans cast lots, they were rolling dice, casting lots for possession of Jesus's clothes, which had been prophesied long ago would happen. Is it the same? Well, it's sort of like casinos now. Is it the same thing when people go in and roll the dice to see if they get to win some money? We are superstitious. The purpose in this book, the reason that the festival is called Purim, is because Haman relied on this superstition, and God had a hand in it nonetheless. So if you want to see this as coincidence, you certainly can. And yet, if you look at the totality of everything that had to fall together just so, not so much.
So you remember that King Xerxes had just told Mordecai and Esther that I've given you all these things, but I cannot revoke the decree that was made. And the Jews are still scheduled to be killed. And we find out 9 months from now. So I'm on verse 9 in chapter 8. At once the royal scribes were summoned, and on the 23rd day of the 3rd month, the month of Sivan, they recorded all of Mordecai's orders to the Jews and to the satraps, governors, and princes of the 127 provinces from India to Kush, writing to each province in its own script, to every people in their own language, and to the Jews in their own script and language. Mordecai wrote in the name of King Xerxes and sealed it with the royal signet ring. He sent the documents by mounted couriers riding on swift horses bred from the royal mares. By these letters, the king permitted the Jews in each and every city the right to assemble and defend themselves, to destroy kill, and annihilate all the forces of any people or province hostile to them, including women and children, and to plunder their possessions. The single day appointed throughout all the provinces of King Xerxes was the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar. A copy of the text of the edict was to be issued in every province and published to all the people, so that the Jews would be ready on the day to avenge themselves on their enemies. The couriers rode out in haste on their royal horses, pressed on by the command of the king, and the edict was also issued in the citadel of Susa.
But here's the thing. Haman got to write his own law and his own, decree that said that on the 13th day of Adar, the Jews were going to get wiped out all over the provinces. And you notice that they wrote it in all the languages for all the 127 provinces, and then sent that decree out with, fast writers so that everybody is on the same page. That's important. But you also notice that there are a whole bunch of languages being spoken, right? That's the reason why before, when I said Xerxes didn't care if she's a Jew, this kingdom he has is made up of all of these different kinds of people, different languages, different customs, all rolled together. Xerxes makes his living off of bringing these people together. So they've had it sent out. And then, as we said last week, Xerxes said, look, I can't undo it, but I'm going to give you my signet ring. You write your own. And if you can come up with something that'll get you out of this mess, you're good. You can say it came from me. Now, this is where I'm less clear than I usually am. Get my train of thought back. They put together the decree that, if you remember, the original says on the 13th day of Adar, the 12th month. Politicians love if you read it this way, like there's a law, well, if you read it this way, it could mean this. And that's not what it meant, right? Bill Clinton went to court and argued over the meaning of the word is. Literally. If we go with this way of saying is, it could, it means I didn't do anything wrong. That's just sort of a hobby, and it didn't just get invented. So what they did was they said, well, technically, that first decree said the 13th of Adar. Doesn't mean the 14th, doesn't mean the 12th. It means that you guys have one day to kill off all the Jews, right? And they wrote a decree that said, but the Jews have the right to assemble their own private armies and fight back. No king wants somebody raising a private army in his kingdom. You understand why? So to give that permission is sort of a big deal. They had the ability to think of anything, and this is what they came up with, is that you now have the right to fight back. And these people may not be quite so bold if they meet with resistance. But not only that, you only have one day to get it done. And they have that day to fight back.
So it's a one-day civil war.
So this is kind of a neat way to wrap this thing up, right? That's what's going on here.
Okay, verse 15. Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal garments of blue and white, with a large gold crown and a purple robe of fine linen. And the city of Susa shouted and rejoiced. For the Jews, it was a time of light and gladness, of joy and honor. In every province and every city, wherever the king's edict and decree reached, there was joy and gladness among the Jews, with feasting and celebrating. And many of the people of the land themselves became Jews, because the fear of the Jews had fallen upon them.
So this is why I don't like to go over too many verses, because I'll leave stuff out. one of the things is when they come up, Mordecai comes up with this new decree. He has it once again translated into every language in the empire, and he has it sent out on fast horses, right? Because it wouldn't do for one or two provinces not to get the message. All of those people would get killed and wouldn't feel like they had the right to fight back. So you got to make sure. That's the difficulty of running a really big kingdom. So he sends this thing out, and then he comes out. He has now been made Xerxes' top dog, and he comes out in royal looking robes. All of a sudden, he has assumed the mantle of power. What you're going to see about Mordecai, and this is reminiscent of Joseph. Remember, Joseph gets sold into slavery in Egypt and is winds up in prison, and he gets to come out to decipher a dream. And then he becomes the number one guy in Egypt next to Pharaoh himself. We have a lot of these cases where these Jews are hard workers, they're trustworthy, even to a foreign pagan king, and they become honored, advisors. So here comes Mordecai, and he's not going to be like Xerxes' other advisors. If you remember, we've been reading how, after they issued this decree, Xerxes and Haman go upstairs and drink, right? Yeah, so what if we've thrown everybody into chaos? So Mordecai is going to be a different kind of advisor, and he comes out dressed in royal robes, and everybody recognizes, that there's a new sheriff in town. And it says then that because of the decree and because Mordecai is now the regent, kind of, that's not the right word, but you understand, he's the top dog that speaks on Xerxes' behalf. And I was watching the Olympics last night, and one of those little islands, Santa Lucia, won a woman's race. But everybody at home there is celebrating because one of our people just did something really big. Well, you can imagine that the Jews are really, really proud because this is one of their own. And he's now, he's at the top of the stairs in the royal robes. And so it's a time of light and gladness. It's a time of celebrating. They haven't won the battle yet, but this new development has, given them all hope. And
how about commenting on that last line that said, and many of the people of the land themselves became Jews because the fear of the Jews had fallen upon them.
People know which way the wind's blowing, right? These people, this God of theirs actually does things for them. We've seen this in other studies. We just got done with it in Jericho. Remember? The fear of the Jews went out ahead of them. But we also saw when the Jews came out of Egypt that they won some of those first battles, and the fear of them went out before them. And so a lot of the time they didn't really have to fight battles. They just had to roll up in the area, and the people said, yeah, no, we get it. Your God actually does things, and we're afraid of you. And we got told the same thing in Jericho, that when Rahab told the spies, look, the people here are scared to death of you. The fear of Yahweh has come upon them. This is the same thing again.
It hit me this week, this fear of God. We're living in a world where the pendulum has swung one way really far. It's the same with how we view God, I think. Some of us might have grown up in churches where the fear of God judging you was high. The fear of God, you hear a lot about the fear of God in the Old Testament. We live in a world now where, people aren't going to worship a God that isn't all love. God is love. And it's that balance, I think, of fear and love. And I think the important thing for us to realize is we're supposed to fear God and God is love, and both of them can exist at the same time.
Well, what we're told at this time is
They
that the people recognize that Mordecai is a Jew and he is ascendant, and they become Jews. And it tells us plain out that it's because the fear of the Jews had gone out before them. It's worth noting. It's going to come up again.
Chapter 9. So now remember, this whole thing took place 3 months, this chapter 8, 3 months after the initial edict went out to kill the Jews. And now we are on the 13th day of the 12th month. So now we are in Adar. It's 9 months later, or a year later from the original decree. On the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, the king's command and edict were to be executed. On this day, the enemies of the Jews had hoped to overpower them, but their plan was overturned, and the Jews overpowered those who hated them. In each of the provinces of King Xerxes, the Jews assembled in their cities to attack those who sought to harm them. No man could withstand them, because the fear of them had fallen upon all people. And all the officials of the provinces, the satraps, the governors, and the king's administrators helped the Jews, because the fear of Mordecai had fallen upon them. For Mordecai exercised great power in the palace, and his fame spread throughout the provinces as he became more and more powerful. The Jews put all their enemies to the sword, killing and destroying them, and they did as they pleased to those who hated them. In the citadel of Susa, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 men, including Parshandatha, Dalphon, Aspatha, Poratha, Adelia, Aradatha, Permashta, Arisai, RDI.
I wouldn't have done that.
Balzatha. He could have said them right, but anyhow, they killed these 10 sons of Haman, son of Habadatha, the enemy of the Jews, but they did not lay a hand on the plunder.
So there's a lot going on here, and it makes a difference. First of all, if you remember in the decree that Mordecai wrote, it said that the Jews had the right to assemble and defend themselves and keep all the stuff, keep the plunder. This is pretty common in war. We've talked about it a lot. The winning side gets to take all the stuff from the losing side. That's in the decree. Now, we're told that people became Jews, and we're told that a lot of the leaders also backed the Jews when the time came. When the 13th day of Adar rolls around, these people see which way the wind blows. And it says that Mordecai had been growing more and more powerful. And you can understand Xerxes' previous advisors. Do you remember how I started this? They're like frat boys. You can get, I mean, you know, you can influence these guys. You can throw a big party. Mordecai is a different sort of ruler. And when you put somebody in who's really competent, he begins to get things done. And they're saying, you know, I don't think we should mess with this guy. So when the day came, the people who had hoped to overthrow the Jews, the tables turned on them, and all of the important people backed the Jews. I was in a history class in college, and it was the 13 colonies, and they voted, and it was 7-6, and the side that had only 6 won. And I remember the professor says, when is 6 out of 13 a majority, or when is 7 out of 13 not a majority? And I know it's when it's the wrong 7. You can vote, and then the 6 who are much, much larger say, yeah, I know we voted, tough luck, right? If you get the right people on your side, you might not need a majority. In this case, it says that the rulers, the satraps and they were on the Jews' side. Nobody loves you when you're down and out, but when you're on the way up, people want to be your friend, right? So this is what's going on here, that on that day, the Jews just absolutely turned the tables, and the people who had hoped to wipe them out instead themselves get killed.
But we're supposed to see with that statement, that last part, of verse 10, but they did not lay a hand on the plunder. What we've seen throughout the Old Testament is when they do not take the plunder, it's because it's not their war, it's God's war.
This goes way back. They were, as all armies, when you win a battle, you get to take the stuff. But there are certain battles with the Jews where God says, this is my battle. I'm giving you the instructions. You're fighting and winning this for a reason. And when it's over, these particular battles, you don't take the stuff. You didn't go into this battle to win plunder. You went into this battle to be my arms and legs. So they have the right to take the stuff. The Jews have the right to take the stuff from these people, and instead they don't touch the plunder. Now, other people watching that have got to be thinking, what's with this? Because you always take the stuff, right? You take the stuff. They don't. So again, when people say that God is not represented in the story of Esther,
He's all over it.
he's all over it. And this is couldn't be any more clear that what they were doing was acknowledging this was God's doing, and we're not taking the stuff. That gesture can't mean anything else. It's too plain. You take the stuff, except the Jews, when it's one of these battles that's ordained by God. So here's another example of how, yes, Yahweh is present in this story.
Verse 11. On that day, the number of those killed in the citadel of Susa was reported to the king, who said to Queen Esther, in the citadel of Susa, the Jews have killed and destroyed 500 men, including Haman's 10 sons. What have they done in the rest of the royal provinces? Now, what is your petition? It will be given to you. And what further do you request? It will be fulfilled.
Yeah, let's stop there. So this day comes around, the big D-Day, right? And they come for the Jews, and the Jews are ready for them, and they wipe the other side out. If you're Xerxes, king, I always talk about how the Romans wanted peace and quiet tranquility. No, every king wants peace and tranquility. Maybe not Nero, I don't know. There are a few crazy ones, but you don't want this stuff going on. It's costly, it's disruptive, it gets in the way of trade, right? So on this day, the Jews have killed people, but just in the citadel of Susa, just in this, the summer capital, if you will, they've killed 500 people. And here I want you to picture this. Here's Xerxes, and there's Esther with him. And he says, I'd really like this to come to a stop. So he says, Esther, your people just in the citadel have killed 500. God only knows what they've done in the provinces. I mean, that's what he's saying. If you'll pardon the vernacular, but that's what he's saying. I mean, they have killed. Are you about done? Can we bring this thing to a close?
You're killing off my people.
Don't get me wrong. Is there anything else you require? And I'll give it to you, but we need to sort of wrap this thing up. That's what's being said. And we find out that they have killed a lot of people out in the provinces. There are 127 provinces. And I just happened to do the math last night. It says, and I'm going to skip that much ahead, says they killed 75,000.
Correct.
That's about 500 people per province. I mean, it's not like there's this, rivers of blood flowing. 500 people, but that's disruptive. So here's Xerxes saying, okay, do you need anything else, or are you satisfied? And she says,
Esther replied, if it pleases the king, may the Jews in Susa also have tomorrow to carry out today's edict, and may the bodies of Haman's 10 sons be hanged on the gallows. So the king commanded that this be done. An edict was issued in Susa, and they hanged the 10 sons of Haman. On the 14th day of the month of Adar, the Jews in Susa came together again and put to death 300 men there, but they did not lay a hand on the plunder. The rest of the Jews in the royal provinces also assembled to defend themselves and rid themselves of their enemies. They killed 75,000 who hated them, but they did not lay a hand on the plunder. This was done on the 13th day of the month of Adar, and on the 14th day they rested, making it a day of feasting and joy.
So he asked Esther, what else do you need? Let's get this thing finished. And Esther says, because the correct answer is, we're done. Thank you. You've given us this opportunity. But Esther says, here in the city, we could use one more day. There are a few people we haven't taken care of yet. If you could just give us one more day, we'll wrap it all up. All right. If that pleases you. And he really doesn't have any choice, but you can almost hear him saying, okay, one day, and then I'm done with this. And they do. They have people that I'm sure they rooted out, these ones that really, really wanted their death. Earlier, it told us that they killed the 10 sons of Haman. Now, that may not sound, that's horrible, but Haman's already dead. He doesn't know about it, right? But they've killed off his lineage. They've killed off his house. And you can't over stress how important this is. They have wiped the memory of this man off the face of the earth. That's a pretty serious declaration. And Esther says, we need one more day. We've got some more people we need to take care of. Oh, and can we just hang the bodies of Haman's 10 sons up on, and in a lot of translations now it says impale. I had told you about that. Nonetheless, what they want is a public display of Haman and Haman's sons that says, this is what happens when you mess with us. This is the ugly part of this story. But it certainly would send a message, don't you think, that Haman had planned to kill all of them, and look what happens. This is another one of those times where, whether we see it or not, the people in Susa, when it says a lot of them became Jews, they saw that God was involved. They took up the worship of Yahweh because they said, hey, this Yahweh must be real. So you see evidence of it, even though it doesn't just say the words, that they understand that Yahweh is involved.
The other thing, this section.
I'm back up to the idea that all the people that hated us, the Jews, where does the word hate come from? The masses. I can understand hatred, but now we've got people all over the provinces, and this writer says they hated us. Where does that come?
They're actually, this has come up a couple of times through this study, and there's a sort of an understanding, a thought. A lot of people think, well, everybody hated the Jews. Everybody did not hate the Jews. When they got the new decree that says they get to defend themselves, it says people rejoiced. They appear to be fairly well liked. And so what you see is that the guy that specifically mentioned, Haman, is a descendant of the Amalekites. This is this ancient blood feud that has been going on and brewing all the way back to Jacob and Esau, right? We're told that it's in there that he was a Agagite, and so there are people who absolutely. How about today? There are people who still you say, well, you came across our border and killed a bunch of people. Oh yeah, but you did this. Well, but before that you did this. Well, yeah, I know, but you remember back in the 6-Day War, you did this, and this has been going on. And so I suspect, even though we're not told, that there are people within this gigantic kingdom of Xerxes who, like Haman, are descendants of Esau. And they always hate the Jews. That's the best answer I can give you.
And they're
That's,
still the descendants,
that's
right?
conjecture on my part, but I think it's fairly soundly rooted. We are told why Haman hates them, and there are other people that, for whatever reason, hate the Jews, but it's not everybody.
Money.
Money?
Because Haman said, you know, I'm putting out this decree and I'm gonna pay for y'all to kill the Jews. And so the inborn, whatever, fallenness of man, greed and avarice, or whatever you wanna call it, then they take that up and they say, okay, I hate them too, I'm gonna get paid for it.
Over time in history, the Jews have been very successful in business. And I know somebody will get on me for a stereotype, but I'm sorry. I mean, it's just true. They've been very successful in business. Money's a big motivator, and jealousy is a big motivator. Gene, I'm having to conjecture, but I think that the people who specifically really hated the Jews, there's probably a good reason. I think most of it boils down to those two things we just talked about.
What bothers me is that this Jewish act are not what I think the Almighty would be ordered. Go and take care of Haman. He's got evil spirits, he's got evil thoughts, he's trying to be God himself. But to kill not only his lineage, but people that we don't even know.
I'm disturbed somewhat that they go that extreme. You know, I don't know what to tell you, different time. The Amalekites, the Jews were told, when you roll in, you get rid of all of them. Well, that meant kill them. And they were, for some reason, especially problematic. Is this rough, you know, trade that we're talking about? It is. But when you start talking about, I'm not sure that's what Yahweh would have wanted. The rabbis for millennia have argued about things like, is it okay to lie to your wife if she asks if the dress makes her look fat? I'm not making this up. Is it okay to lie to your wife under those circumstances? And they have arguments. They write stuff on it. So to sit back and say, is that what Yahweh would have wanted? I can't say that I'm real happy at the idea of hanging 10 people's bodies up on poles, whether it's impaled or not. That doesn't sound, it certainly doesn't sound Christ-like to me.
But
Go ahead.
You have a mic? Is it on?
Yeah.
Go ahead. We'd like
Well,
to.
maybe we can both talk.
All right.
Oh, sorry.
Well, I've always thought, you know, maybe that's why churches don't teach the Old Testament.
Yes.
It is
Yeah.
such a hard pill to swallow. But if this group of people was going to destroy you, you would have to destroy this so you could survive. I mean, I could not read the Old Testament, you know, and people always say, well, look what they did back then.
Yeah.
Well, now as a believer, I don't know. It's like we can't understand. I mean, we're living in this society where we have certain rules and things that, you know, our culture, you know, that we've learned. But back then, how can we even know?
But
Anyway, I
look
just
at
find it-
today, even look
Yeah.
at today.
Yeah.
I mean, there
They
are
don't
people
want it
that
to-
want Jews off the face of the earth,
Right.
and the Jews said no, and I mean, we are experiencing it today.
Yeah, we are. Yeah. It's an interesting thing.
You're going to say, John Paul?
so, okay, so where does that come from?
Words what?
Well, like, how can you just wipe them out? I don't know. Think of Noah. He destroyed the world. They flooded the world to get rid of evil. And the evil, I mean, yes, there's Esau, there's Cain, there's all these bloodlines where their replications are grown into this hatred. So, okay, when you have a group of people like today that attack Israel, what's in their constitution? They wrote a constitution that said their main goal is to destroy Israel. It's in their constitution. And so people blindly, like to me, cover their eyes and go, well, that didn't really say that. They said that. And so God wants these people wiped out because it's a rejection of him, and the hatred is so deep, there's no convincing them.
You know, John Paul, now we're getting down into those discussions that have plagued believers from all the way back. This is where we start getting into the hard part. I will tell you, and this is going to go down like a bitter pill. People don't like to hear it, but in the Ten Commandments, where it says thou shalt not kill, that's not their word for murder. Or I mean, that is their word for murder. They have they have other words, as they often do. That commandment says thou shalt not murder, and I have gotten into some heated exchanges with some pastors, and just said, you know, I can only tell you what it says. If you don't like it, if you think what it really means is you shouldn't kill anything. I mean, there have been people in time that wore masks around their face lest they hurt some bug, because it says you shall not kill. It says you shall not murder. And there were sanctuary cities put up under God's instruction for people who inadvertently killed someone so that they could go live there and not have revenge brought on them. These things that go on in the Old Testament, you know, they're hard. And this idea, did they carry it too far? Did Esther and Mordecai carry it too far? I can't be the judge of that. I don't know. I can tell you what it says, but I can tell you that you're right. These people wanted them all dead. They want them to disappear from the face of the earth. Do you have a right to fight back in a situation like that? We're told to turn the other cheek. A lot of people went to their own executions singing and praising God during the early church time. Now we're down into the things that are really, really hard. My hope and prayer is that nobody that is part of this, we never have to face that decision. But if you do, I would suggest this is a time that requires a lot of prayer and fasting if you're faced with something like that.
Hey, Scott,
Yes, sir.
so when you say that they, whatever, when they annihilated the Amalekites, were the Amalekites the one that were in the promised land?
They were one group, and they didn't annihilate them. They didn't get rid of the Amalekites.
They were
That
supposed to.
was Saul, I think, that just kind of let them stay there, and it caused them no end of problems. And then later on, that Agag, A-G-A-G, who was a king of the Amalekites, is the one that got brought back. They were supposed to get rid of all of them, and instead he brings him back in as a trophy, just to show off. So they were told long before those people, Amalekites, were in the promised land, and God said, you're going to conquer the land, but these people, you're going to dispose of.
But didn't God say to the Israelis before they went into the promised land? I'm not talking about just kill the people, kill everything, cows, dogs, everything. Eliminate everything from the promised
And
land.
Yeah.
I shot my mouth off in a hurry last week. I'm going to go slow on that one. There are times they were told to do that, though. Yeah, and I think it's these Amalekites. You will notice, though, that we were told 3 different times they didn't take the plunder. The extra day that they got, and they kill off another 300 of these conspirators in Susa, and they didn't take the plunder. Out in the 127 provinces, they killed off 75,000. And please understand that they don't go, okay, 74,998, 74,999, 75,000 done. All right, that's it. It's a round number. These are estimates, but they killed off 75,000 people, and they didn't take the plunder. This is conspicuous. None of the
And when
people,
people, this is why we have to study it this way, because other people, Jewish people who read this right after this, who heard this, would say, oh, this was a war, or this was a battle that was a holy battle. This was God's battle. They would have heard that. And else we study it this way, we would miss it. This was a battle ordained by God,
yep.
is what it's saying.
And it's certainly what they would believe when they don't take the plunder. Yes, is your mic on?
Yes, Scott, I just want to piggyback a little bit on what Mario and follow up with a question I've had for, eons. When God told the Jews to go in and kill all the people, all the livestock, the crops, everything, they didn't do it. They didn't listen to God.
Right.
They didn't obey him. So they are still suffering from that mistake because they didn't do what God, who knows what's best.
That is
They
indeed the
didn't
message.
do what God told them to do. They disobeyed him.
Yep. What got Saul into trouble was he went out and fought one of these battles that they're not supposed to take the plunder. And the people, his generals and stuff said, look, we can't leave all this behind. It doesn't even make sense. You got to take some of it. So Saul hauls back cattle. And it says God speaks to him. It says, didn't I tell you, don't take the plunder? And he says, well, but the people, it's like Eve, the old story that they tempted me, the snake tempted me. And he says, my general said it wouldn't hurt anything. And I was really just bringing them back here to sacrifice to you. He got told, don't take the plunder. And that's why that line coming up 3 times is so important, because they had the right to take it and they didn't. And there's one of my answers, Gene, about whether or not God is show up in this book. There is no other reason for them to forego the plunder other than sending that message that this was God's battle. And if you remember back at the, near the beginning, when Mordecai says to Esther, who knows, maybe you were brought to the kingdom for just such a time as this. Brought by whom? Who else could be? What did Mordecai mean by that? He meant that God brought you here for a reason. Certainly, he's not saying that Xerxes had the foresight to bring you here to help our people. This is an absolute acknowledgement of God's hand in this. Even though he didn't say maybe Yahweh brought you here. It says maybe you were brought into the kingdom for just such a time. But there's no other, I can't even think of another thing that could mean other than God brought you here for a reason. And that's why I keep insisting on some of this. It's all over this book.
Okay, we are at 9, and so we didn't get to do my time. We didn't get to finish this book, but it's okay. The last part of this, and we will do it next week, is about the Feast of Purim and how it was carried out. So we will start with that. I don't think it's a complete.
I don't know what we'll do for the balance of the time,
but and I will tell you what we're thinking about doing next is a study of what the Bible says about prayer. And this one, it will be a little different in the fact that we do have to skip around because we won't be studying a book, but we will be studying the passages that the Bible talks about prayer.
we'll figure something out for the balance of the time. Yes, Gene.
That was a conflict. But I was thinking, that character that likes her in the books and that's a great program on Esther.
Yeah, it
see if we
is.
can pull it up. Maybe
That'd be good. That'd be a good
we
place.
have a couple of other things, but that's a good suggestion to it.
The Bible Project.
Yeah, Bible Project. And we'll finish it up next week. But you start looking now, the fact that they named this remembrance Purim. And what this story is showing is that Haman trusted just the winds of chance, right? He's casting lots. And the Jews are supposed to rely on God. And when they do, there's deliverance for them. And the turnabout of somebody who has hit the pinnacle of success. And he says, you know, I'm gonna cast lots. This thing is named Purim after the lots for a reason. And we're supposed to see this incredible turnaround from what was going to be a disaster for them, turns out to be a disaster for the people who were trying to kill them. And we see so many of the themes that continue through the Old Testament. The Jewish advisors who become very trusted and trustworthy. So, you know, again, I can't prove it because I can't find the word Yahweh in here, but I see evidence of it everywhere. Anyone else? Feel like I'm rambling just a little bit. I'm still a little out of it with the lack of sleep. God, you know, I struggle sometimes to pray for a group of people, not knowing what's in everyone else's heart. And sometimes I can only speak for myself, but I'm grateful for the people that are here. I'm thankful for the questions, for the idea that we're looking for the best way to bring ourselves to your heart, to your way of thinking, that we're seeking more than just a story. We're seeking how we can put these things into our lives. I'm thankful that you've brought people into our lives this way, that you give us this gift of each other. Be with us this week as we go out. You know, we always have needs. You know, we're concerned for these ones that we continue to bring. And we recognize that all of us have a limited amount of time. Our times come. But from the time that we're here, give us that strength and heart to be your hands in this place. Amen.
Thank you, guys. Hope you guys have a good day.
Thank you,
Daryl,
Mary
don't-
and Scott.
Thank you, Scott.
Daryl,
Mary.
don't do too much yard work.
Yes, ma'am. Try not
Oh,
to.
but you're,
There
wait,
you go. Have a good day. Talk to you soon.
Bye, everybody.